G'day everyone, my name's Zach and welcome back to Printed. As you can see, I'm changing up the format a little bit. I've got the big old sexy camera out, we've got the mic right here. I'm not 100% sure if I'm going to be sticking with this sort of thing, but I figured I'd try something a little bit different. If you guys love it, let me know down in the comments down below. If you guys don't like it, make sure you let me know in the same spot. This week I'm going to be showing you how I painted up my Old Blood on Carnosaur. Kind of the leftover from the Skink Star Priest kit that we did last week. Without further ado everyone, let's jump straight into it and see how I painted this bad boy. First and foremost, I want to say that I was actually following along with a Cult of Paint video for this one. I noticed it months ago when I was going through. I love the videos that they do, and I figured that I wanted to try and sort of emulate their style. So I decided to take inspiration and just follow along with that tutorial, trying a couple of techniques that I really wanted to experiment with. So to save you all the hoo-ha, I went and gave these guys a little bit of a zenithal prime in the background. As you can see, I went super heavy with this. We do want to preserve some of those shadows, but I want to make sure that we can get those colors on, keeping a nice environment. So they're mostly white with a little bit of darkness in the shadows. As you can see, I decided to do a couple of sub-assemblies. I figured it would be slightly easier to pop this guy on a little oval base because I didn't have any round ones nearby, and smacked him into the stand. Now, we did a poll last week for those who don't know, and everyone decided that you guys wanted to go for a video that was slightly more longer with a few more in-depth explanations, so we'll definitely be doing that today. I started by getting my wet palette set up, tearing all the old stuff off, and then grabbing some white pigmented paint. This titanium white by Artlier is not fantastic through the airbrush, but I tend to find that it paints on pretty well. I did manage to grab some pale sand as well, and I made this mix really watery. Basically about 3 parts water to 1 part paint. I wanted to make sure that it was going to be nice and smooth and that we weren't going to clog up all the details on this beautiful model. So first and foremost, I just went over with like a very heavy pass, making sure that it wasn't pooling in any areas. We don't want to clog up any of the details and make it look kind of nasty. Now, I think in the end I ended up doing maybe roughly 1 to 3 coats of this. Now next up, I did grab some Caribou Crimson Shade and some Lamian Medium as well, and I mixed these guys roughly 50-50. With the 50-50 mix, I ended up just smacking it over all of the scales. As you can see, it runs in nicely, really brings out that detail, and I'm going to go super light with this first pass. Just like the pale skin, I wanted to make sure that it was nice and smooth, and then we can slowly build up that transition. Similar to what we did on the Croxagore a couple of videos ago, but really focus it in on the center. As you can see, very slight gradient. Next up, we got some Shyish Purple. Now, I wasn't 100% sure what I wanted to do with this because I didn't have the exact same paint that Cult of Paint used. So I figured that if I watered a little bit of this down, thinking that it was going to be a little bit more purple than what it actually was. It's more of like a light sort of grayish purple more than anything, not really a purple in itself. So again, I just mixed that 50-50 with water, making sure that it was nice and smooth. And then I started to just pick out things like his ankles, his toes, and his fingers. Sort of where the skin is going to be really thin and we can just bring a bit more depth to it. Next up, I grabbed some Storm Vermin Fur. Again, doing a nice, it was probably about 75% paint to 25% water. Nice and smooth. And I just went over all the horns and everything. The difference with the head though, I did add a lot more water and then glaze up over a couple of different layers. Just to make sure there was a nice smooth transition from the top of the head where it was white to the tip of the horns. And as you can see, it goes on really smoothly, and don't have to worry about being too messy with this because we are going to actually come back later. Those parts that are going to be gold will be painted over. Next up, grabbing some Black Legion contrast. Just like in Cult of Paint's video, I wanted to make sure that we picked up the armor and gave it a nice separation from the rest of the body. And I don't know, for some reason, it just looks really cool when you block things out with certain colors. I've never been much of a base coat than shade kind of guy. I kind of just work on all parts of the mini at once, very chaotically. As you've probably noticed in a lot of my videos, I jump and change around from different parts. And like you can see here, looks super slick. Basically any part that's going to be gold or the Jade, I base coated with this one, just to give us a nice base and to make sure that those metallics, if we were going to use them, were going to look good. I did come back with a little bit of that Caribou Crimson mix and just pick out the teeth and the eyes. Brings a little bit of depth, and then we'll come back a little bit later in the video and fix those guys up. Now, I initially grabbed some of this, I do believe it was Black Legion and water, and started going around his spine. Now, it was a little bit darker than what I thought it would be, but I didn't fuss too much because I have done this before, and it didn't turn out too bad. Because the Seraphon are kind of good because you can get away with being a little bit more messy, and the scales kind of hide your mistakes. Next up, grabbing some Incubi Darkness, we're going to be base coating every single area that we want to paint Jade. Again, I did this in a really thin coat. It does sound very tedious. You can go with a slightly thicker layer. I like to go in with really thin layers so that it's not too thick and we can keep it nice and smooth and then build it up. Now, after the first coat, as you can see, it didn't do much, so I went for a slightly thicker second coat there and just smacked it over basically everything. And I'm super excited to try the Jade on this. Now, moving in with some pale sand, I just mixed this in with the Incubi Darkness mix. And basically, every time I mixed in a little bit more, I would do these little scratchy patterns over everything, making sure to focus on areas that would sort of be more damaged as he battled. Things like the fingertips, the edges of the claws, and kind of things that will, you know, the top, the highest bits in it. Now, I did just go through, do a little bit of scratchy pattern, sort of chipping away at his hand here. And as you can see, I slowly built it up to that final highlight. Now, at this point, I wasn't super happy with how this Jade was looking. I figured I wanted to tone it down a little bit and bring back those green vibes. So grabbing some Collier green shade, I mixed this down, I think it was roughly 50-50 with water, and I ended up just slapping it over the entire thing. This kind of darkens everything down and then also brings it all together so it looks more like a bit of a cohesive piece. Next up, grabbing some Mournfang brown. I am very pedantic about my golds in the fact that I never do the same thing twice. So I decided to try a Mournfang brown base coat instead of mixing the Retributor armor in with it this time, like we did in our last video. So pretty much just going around base coating anything that's going to be in that gold color. Now, I did also do kind of a scratchy pattern on this, sort of dabbing it there, as you can see. This helps bring a little bit of the shadows in and make sure that we don't go too wild, which I did right here. This is pretty easy. I just grabbed my little nasty brush and just chuck a bit of water on that and then kind of mix it around. If you're super quick when you make mistakes, it is super easy to clean those guys up. And as you can see, I just come back in with my original brush and just mop up the rest of that one. Next up, we're going to be working on more of the gold with some Retributor armor. Now, I didn't apply this over the entire area. I mainly focused it on parts that were pointing up, so that it creates a bit more of a realistic look. This also helps add a bit of depth to the armor because if it was all the same color, we'd most likely have to come back in with a darker color later. But since we started with the Mournfang brown, we can kind of cheat our way to these highlights. Now, I kept this clip a little bit longer, as you can see, so I could demonstrate where I'm actually putting these highlights. You can kind of see where my ring light shines, there is a bit of a highlight just naturally where the paint is. And I pretty much just followed that. You know, the best thing that you can do is imitate reality. Now, specifically on his tail back here, I did kind of try to do a non-metallic metal-esque vibe. As you can see, the entire top part here is actually in light. So I went ahead and painted all of that with Retributor armor, making sure to leave the underside in that nice dark Mournfang brown. I absolutely love gimmick things, so I ended up grabbing my SMS Hyperchrome paint pen. And you don't particularly need one of these, you can just use a brush and a really bright silver. I recommend Vallejo Liquid Gold, the fantastic paint, but I don't know, painting with big pen really tickles my brain. Now I ended up grabbing a few different colors and we're going to be working on the metallics on his spear next. Basically, I searched up a thing online, a reference photo. I'll add it here right now to kind of guide me through the entire process. Now, it's not super perfect because I don't paint non-metallic metal a lot. But long story short, I've noticed that when you do it, you're pretty much putting highlights opposite each other. If you're going to have a really bright spot on the top, you want to have an opposing dark spot on the bottom. This kind of adds a metallic-y feel. And as you can see, I kind of just slowly build it up to those brighter highlights. And your best friend is edge highlighting. This really makes it super crisp and helps define that this is a metallic object. Now, as you can see, I'm actually pretty happy with how this turned out. Although there's a lot of room for improvement, I think it's a good base. Next up, I grabbed some Flesh Terror Red contrast paint and just went over all of his tongue here. Nice and simple. This isn't really a focus of the model, so I don't spend too much time on it. Next up, just grabbing some pale sand, I quickly picked out all of his teeth. Now, I used some pale sand, Black Legion, and Trollsayer Orange on the big Carnosaur. First off, I started by just sketching out a pattern. Now, I was actually inspired by a model I saw online. I'll add the reference right here. As you can see, super cool design that they've done in this one, in the art piece. And I figured that I wanted to recreate this, and it'd kind of give me a good guide and sort of stop me guessing everything. So after sketching that out, I went ahead and picked the Black Legion up and just went over all the scaly bits, making sure not to go over anything that's white. If we do make a mistake, we can either just say he's got that color there, or we can come back in with a little bit of white. But fortunately enough, I didn't make any mistakes. I did change the plan slightly here though. I ended up grabbing some skeleton horde because I wasn't super happy with how bright everything was. I wanted to tone it down and mix it all together, just so it looks more like a cohesive piece. As you can see, I went over specifically all the bottom of him first, and then ended up deciding that I'm just going to end up washing the whole model. As you can see, it's really darkened the model down and kind of taken a lot of shine off those scales. So I decided to come back with some grey paint and dry brush that one back on. Now, as you can see here, it is slightly shinier than our previous layers. This kind of creates a bit of a fake highlight, and I'm a very lazy painter. I like getting miniatures done very quickly. So this was such an easy thing to do. And as you can see here, it's definitely added to all the shine. Next up, just grabbing some pale sand, I went super heavy over all of his skin. Specifically like the little fleshy bits on the bottom of him, just so that they would look nice and detailed. Even though I spent roughly about 3 minutes on him total. On the skin, I should say. Yeah, as you can see, especially on this foot here, it really brings out a lot of the detail. Dry brushing is one of your friends, and the best thing I can recommend is keeping a nice moist brush, but not too moist when you do it. Next up, just going in with pure pale sand and a little bit of water mixed in, I slowly highlighted up that skin. I think I went over with roughly about 2 or 3 coats, just to make it nice and smooth and take off that dry brushing edge. Now, for the metallics on this one, again, I'm changing my gold recipe. I know, wild stuff. I wanted to go over with some wildwood because I wasn't super happy with how dark the Mournfang brand was on the old blood. So I pretty much just went over it. This more or less reserves all the details that you can see here. It's going to keep our light values from our initial coat. And then jumping up to some Retributor armor, I just lay it over everything, making sure to keep the darkest recesses with that wildwood in it. And it was super fun to do. I don't know what it is about painting the trim on the Seraphon, but it's just a different kettle of fish compared to the Chaos armies that I'm used to. And as you can see here, it really adds some nice contrast between the whole model. Making sure to be super careful, we don't want to fill in those nice intricate little details. Next up, grabbing some Thousand Suns Blue and Evil Sun Scarlet, I was going to start working on his altar. As you can see, most of it is done, but I pretty much just repeated the steps that I did on the original gold on this one. Now, I picked out both of these little triangle thingies in each of the colors. Adds a little bit of color variety, and I wasn't going to bother with putting any more colors on it. This isn't really a centerpiece of the model, so I figured we can get away with not doing a ton of layers on it. It was actually quite fun painting little triangles, and a bit of a nice challenge, really getting my hand in for the freehand. Now that all of that was painted, it was time to assemble the model. Usually what I do is I would scrape the model down and then apply plastic glue to everything. But due to the fiddliness of this model, I figured super glue is just going to be our best bet. So I scraped a little bit of it down and then jumped in and put it all together. Now we're going to jump onto the base. I'm not going to run you guys super thoroughly through this. I have done it in 2 other videos. If you guys want to go and check that out, I recommend jumping over to my Croxagore video just up here for you. And it runs you into detail on why we do everything. So first and foremost, I started by applying a black layer over everything. This Vallejo Air Black is actually super thin. So I ended up having to do 2 coats of it because I noticed a lot of the white was still shining through when I finished. Next up, quick and dirty, I'm just going to do an Evil Sun Scarlet mix across the base and basically sketch out all of our lava patterns that we're going to have in there. This is more or less a 50-50 mix. Usually you don't have to come back with a second mix. It's kind of opaque enough to get the job done. And again, we're just grabbing our Troll Slayer orange and just going in the center bit, making sure to keep a bit of that red on the outside. We want to really give it that magma look. I will admit, this is probably one of the funnest processes of the model, and I think this base all in all took me about 5 minutes, not including the drying time. Before the orange was dry, I did come back in with the yellow and then mix that through. This makes it a little bit of a smoother transition. It looks like the magma is kind of melting together. Last but not least, I did a roughly 75 to 25% paint mix of water to paint and just went over the entire thing. This creates a little bit of a cheaty glow. If you have an airbrush, you can use that. I do, but I want to keep this tutorial accessible to everyone at home. Now, I just wanted to do this to show you guys that you don't actually need an airbrush to create cool glow effects. You can just use a bit of time and patience and carefully go over the model. I could have made this a lot smoother than it actually is, but I decided that we'll just do a nice little slap on, and it still looks pretty good in my opinion. Alright, we're almost done with this model. I just ended up grabbing some Stormvermin fur and just going over everything that's going to be stone. We don't want to make this super complicated. This is a base. We don't want it to take away from the model. So I just very haphazardly kind of just dry brush it over everything. I did only mostly do this on the areas that were stone. I didn't bother about all the ground cover and everything. As you can see, it was blending a little bit, but I guess this kind of adds to the glow. As you can see, I did get a little bit of the other paint in this because it wasn't quite dry, but I feel like it kind of just adds to the glow effect, which I guess just a cheeky little happy accident. So next up, I jumped onto the base room. We're not quite done yet, but it just ties the model in nicely and really cleans up everything. I didn't really particularly want to come back to the base, so I figured I'd just get it all done and dusted now. As you can see, this is kind of translucent, so I did have to come back with a second coat once that one was dry. Now, as per usual, we're going to use White Scar and Tesseract Glow. As you can see, I've pretty much decided that green glowing eyes is the source of magic for my Seraphon. So I started by just doing a little bit of a White Scar over all the eyes and just dropping a bunch of Tesseract Glow onto the model. And with that, the model was complete. Now, I'm actually really impressed with how this model came out. As soon as I put the skeleton hoard on it, I wasn't 100% convinced whether or not this would actually turn out. But all in all, I'm really impressed, and overall, it's tied the model together quite nicely. As you can see, we've got a nice, cool looking Carnosaur, and then the old blood with that non-metallic metal spear. And I'm just really happy to keep on doing. Just want to say a huge shout out to everyone who has been watching this video and supporting the previous videos. Y'all have been amazing. If you like this video, make sure to leave a like on it. If you want to keep up with future projects, there is a bunch of new ones coming in the new year. Make sure to subscribe. And until next time, everyone, happy hobbying. Catch us later. Bye.